Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining this InvestEngine webinar in partnership with WisdomTree, which is all about megatrends. I'm Andy Prosser. I'm the head of investments at InvestEngine, and I'm joined today by Pierre Debru, who is the head of quantitative research and multi-asset solutions at WisdomTree. Now, in terms of the plan for the webinar today, Pierre's got a presentation which he's going to run through. So I'm going to hand over to him in a second to run us all through that. After that, I'll do a very quick demo of how to use the InvestEngine platform, and then we'll have a Q&A with Pierre for the last kind of 10 minutes or so. Now, if you do want to ask questions as we're going through the webinar, you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The questions won't be broadcast to the whole webinar chat. They're just going to come straight to us, me and Pierre. So don't worry if you think you've got a stupid question. Absolutely fine. Feel free to ask away, and we're going to answer as many as we can at the end. Now, it's my job to make sure that everything runs on time. And I know there's a lot you want to cover today, Pierre. So I just want to make sure I leave enough time at the end for the platform demo and the Q&A. So I'm hoping that once we've wrapped up everything, we'll be ending the webinar at about 5:45-ish. Now, before we get going, though, one final bit of housekeeping. I do need to mention the usual disclaimer that your capital is at risk whenever you invest. This webinar is for UK clients only, and that none of this is financial advice. So with that said, I'm going to hand over to you, Pierre. But just before you get stuck into the presentation, maybe you can kick us off by giving us all a quick intro into who you are and who WisdomTree are as well, for those who might not be so familiar.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm the head of research in Europe for WisdomTree. WisdomTree, we are the largest independent ETF provider in the world. We have 115 billion of assets under management. In Europe, we're very well known because we are the leader in commodity exchange traded product with a lot of product around gold, oil, copper, basically any commodity you can think of. But more generally, we are also a pioneer in equity factor investing, so everything from value, quality, and so on. So that's kind of who WisdomTree is. So if we go straight away into the presentation, and Andrew, feel free to stop me if you want to ask any question on behalf of the audience.
Yep,
but today we wanted to discuss megatrends. And so before we go into different strategies, the idea was very much to start from what's the point of investing in thematics, right? And the key here is that if you look at the way the world changes, there are clear trends that are driving those changes, and there is a clear opportunity for investors to benefit from those trends if they manage to invest in them early, right? And so, of course, we've heard about AI recently, but you can go back quite a long time. You could think about investing in rebuilding post-World War II. You could think about the baby boom in the 50s, the rise of Japan in the 70s, the internet in the 90s note, and all of those trends obviously were a huge investment opportunity for investors. And so thematics is very much about using those trends to try to drive investment. And if we look at the next slide, what's really interesting is that if you look at the biggest company in the world at a given point in time, very often in transparency, you can see the trends that have been driving the world for the previous 2 or 1 decade, right? So if you look at the biggest company in the world in the 90s, they're all Japanese, very much the result of this rise of Japan megatrend I was talking about. If you look at the biggest company in the world in 2020 or right now, they're very much driven by the rise of the internet. And now, if you look at the biggest company in the world right now, we are starting to see the AI megatrend come in with NVIDIA reaching the top 3, top 2, depending on the day you look. So very much by investing in those trends early, you can potentially invest in those mega caps of tomorrow early and so benefit from their exponential growth. Now, if you look at the next slide, how can you, as an investor, invest in thematics? There is really 2 avenues that are open to you: single thematic strategies or multi-thematic strategies. Single thematic strategies is where investors can select the theme they are the most convinced by, at a point in time. They can choose the exact theme they want. They can choose the exact timing that they want. So it's a very flexible way to invest in thematics. The other side of that coin, though, is that it can be quite time consuming. There can be quite a lot of themes. You could argue that the timing of those themes can be difficult a little bit. So some investors are very keen to do single thematic. What we are seeing as well in the market is that we are seeing more and more flows going through multi-thematic, because a lot of investors, they understand the goal of investing in thematics, but they may not have the time, enough time to dedicate to that endeavor, and they want to delegate the decision around the selection of the theme, the weight to each theme, the timing of the themes, and so on, to a manager or to a specialist. And that's where multi-thematic strategy come in. Now, in the next slide, what we want to show is that if we focus on multi-thematic strategy, it's interesting to see how most multi-thematic strategies have been built historically, and what they have been built around as a concept is basically they've been built bottom up, meaning that they've been built by selecting individual stocks first, right? So you don't do top down, which is you select the theme and then you select the stocks for each theme. It's more you select the stocks because you think they are thematic stocks, right? Now, because they are built like this, what we found very, very surprising when we did a lot of research on thematics is that if you look at the average number of stocks in a multi-thematic strategy in Europe, you'll see that it's around 97, right? That's a blue number in the middle of this slide. But if you look at the average number of stocks in different themes, you'll see that it's not that different. So in AI, you have on average 60. In cloud, you have on average 50 stock. In semiconductor, maybe 45. And so it raises the question of how can you do a proper multi-thematic strategy that covers 10, 12, 15 themes if you basically have the same number of stocks as you have in a single theme, right? And so if you look through, like I said, you see that sorry, you need to stay on the previous slide, thank you. If you look through and you look at it, you realize that those strategies are built bottom up, and they are built in two ways usually. Either it's by looking for companies that are doing many themes at the same time. So you could think, for example, about Amazon and say, okay, Amazon is e-commerce, but it's also entertainment because they have Prime, and it's also cloud because they have AWS, and now it's also AI because they are building more and more data center. And so you say, okay, with this stock, I can do 4 themes. But if you do that, you're investing in the mega cap of today instead of the mega cap of tomorrow. And so you're kind of investing in the NASDAQ. Or second approach is to be extremely selective and to say, I have 100 stock, 10 theme I want to invest in. Therefore, I'll pick 10 stock per theme. And so looking at AI, where there is on average 60 stock usually, you would have to pick 10 out of 60. And this approach is for us quite dangerous because it's easy to miss the real winner of the AI or whatever theme we're looking at. So for example, you could say, I know what's going to happen to AI. I'm going to put all my chips in NVIDIA. And then you have what happened 2 or 3 weeks ago, where you have a new player that comes in, which is called DeepSeek, and completely reshuffle the cards for AI. And maybe you were on the wrong horse, right? So to us, this two approach of being either too concentrated on the mega cap or too selective is a big risk. And that's why when we decided to build our own multi-thematic strategy, we took a completely different approach. And so the next slide, you can see that the big principle of this approach, which is to do it top down, meaning that we start from the theme, we don't start from the company, to very much focus on the diversification between the theme, to focus on the company that are the rising stars of tomorrow, not the giants of today, meaning maybe more small cap, maybe more mid cap, and to focus on pure play company. So companies that are focused on 1 or 2 themes maximum, not companies that are doing 10 or 12 themes, right? So if we move to the next slide, or to the slide after that, we can see the exact steps that we use to build the portfolio of our WisdomTree Megatrend UCITS ETF. And you can see here there is 3 main steps which we think create value at each step. The first step is what we call the strategic thematic asset allocation. The idea is that every year we look at all of the themes that are currently playing out in the world, and we pick the one that we think has the highest growth potential, but also the highest diversification potential between themselves. And so that allows us every year to build a curated portfolio of themes that we think are the most promising in the medium to long term. So just to be clear, we don't change all the theme every year. Every year we revise and we make sure that if a theme has played out, it is removed. If a new theme is coming in and is interesting, we put it in, right? The second layer is what we call the tactical thematic asset allocation. It is every quarter, we look at the theme we have selected for the year, and we are going to overweight, underweight those themes depending on the current market condition. So if a theme is particularly hot at a given point in time, we'll want to overweight it. If a theme is a little bit cold at a given point in time, we'll want to underweight it, right? And so this tactical overlay is meant to lean into basically the sentiment around the different themes, because a lot of those themes, they're sentiment driven, right? And finally, the thematic stock selection is where we select the stock that we want to invest in for each theme, right? And here we use the same thematic philosophy that we've been using for all of our single theme ETF. And the idea is that we don't want to be overly selective. So if we have, for example, 60 stocks in the WisdomTree Artificial Intelligence ETF, we'll use the same 60 stocks for the 10% that are allocated to AI in the megatrend. So you can, that way you benefit from the expertise and the work that has also been done in developing the single theme ETF as well. And so with those 3 layers, top down, we think you can create a portfolio that really makes sense for the long term in megatrends. So if we go to the next slide, we can go a little bit deeper.
Can I just chip in with a quick question, Pierre? Just on that, on step 1 of the previous slide there, about kind of deciding on the different themes. Who is it that decides which themes are selected? Is that you? Is there a team behind it? How does that decision-making process work?
So first, it's a process that is a mix between quantitative and quantitative inputs, right? So there is a lot of quantitative input that goes into it from the diversification angle, from the potential for growth angle. But then there is a qualitative overlay, and that overlay is done by a committee, right, which is a group of our thematic experts in WisdomTree. And so we reconvene on a regular basis to discuss the outcome of the quantitative process and basically manage this first layer, if you want.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course. So the next slide is just to explain a little bit more on this first layer. As I said, we have to pick around 15 themes every year, but pick from where? And here is, I think, one of the key tools that we have at our disposal, and that's part of the quantitative approach I was talking about, which is that we have a WisdomTree thematic classification where we try every month to follow all of the themes that are currently in play in the world and have a proper map of it, so that at any point in time when it comes about selecting the theme, we know what is the total universe of themes that we could be looking at, right? And then from that map, we can use quantitative measures to figure out which theme we should consider and which theme we should not consider. So for example, some theme will be completely played out, some theme will be too early and there is no currently public stocks being traded on those themes, and these type of things are going to be important for us to basically select the theme for the strategic thematic allocation. And so the next slide, you can see the current strategic thematic asset allocation for the ETF. You can see it's currently 16 themes, 7 in what we call the technological shift cluster, 6 in the environmental pressure cluster, and 3 in demographic and social shift, right? So in tech, we have AI, blockchain, cybersecurity, health tech, cloud, digital infrastructure, which is a lot of data centers, semiconductors. Environmental pressure is more green tech, so batteries, clean energy, sustainable food, sustainable resource management, nuclear, energy transition miners, and then demographic and social shift, aging population, rise of the middle class, rise of the EM consumer. And the way we allocate weight between those themes is 50 in tech, 40 in green tech, 10 in demographic and social shift, because that's the market cap of thematic investment worldwide right now. And then for the theme, we do equal weight inside those three clusters. So for example, artificial intelligence is going to get 50% divided by 7, right? So it's equal weight the theme, because we don't think it's possible to really say AI is more important than blockchain or more important than cybersecurity long term. So the strategic weight is equal weight inside the cluster. So that's for the first step. Second step, as I said, is this tactical overlay. And so the next slide explains a little bit the idea behind the tactical overlay. Is basically the second step is to acknowledge the fact that while we think that all the themes we pick have long-term growth potential, we also have to acknowledge that that growth potential is not going to be realized in a linear way, right? Like the way thematic tend to be deployed is through waves. So a formal way to look at this is what we call the Gardner hype cycle. But the idea is to say there is some period where the sentiment is particularly strong behind a theme and the performance is going to be very strong. Then you have some period where the sentiment is a little bit less strong and the performance is going to be less good. And so even if you have this generally increasing trajectory for the theme, the performance may be a little bit more wavy around that increasing trend. And one good example to acknowledge this or to show this is to think about AI. AI is a theme that has been around for quite a while, will probably be around for many years to come. But since the launch of ChatGPT in 2022, we are clearly in a period where AI is in focus. But if you think about cloud, for example, cloud was very much in focus in the second half of 2020 as well because of COVID and because everyone had to call their family through Zoom. And so you were realizing the potential of cloud computing. Cybersecurity was very much in focus post the start of the Ukraine war. And so you see how there is a bit of a focus on some theme at given point in time. And the objective is for the strategy to benefit from that. So in the next slide, we just explained a little bit how we do this. So this part, you were asking how we do layer 1. Layer 2, this part is entirely quantitative. So there is no human input. It's very much about capturing sentiment changes. And so it's mostly about momentum and sentiment. And the idea is very much to go into themes that are currently seeing positive momentum, positive sentiment, and go a little bit out of themes that are seeing negative sentiment, negative momentum, right? And so it is not valuation based, it is not fundamental based, it is very much momentum based, because if you look at AI, for example, or the performance of NVIDIA since November 2022, if you really think about what's the trigger is the launch of ChatGPT. It's not something that is relevant to NVIDIA from a fundamental or valuation point of view. It's an external event, and momentum is the best way to capture moves that are driven by external event. So if we look at the current allocation in the 16 theme I was talking about, in the next slide, you'll see that at the last quarterly rebalance, which was mid-January, we ended up being overweight AI, blockchain, cloud, cybersecurity, which are very much benefiting from Trump's election in the US and the expectation of deregulation, tax cuts that are very favorable for smaller cap and in particular software companies. So that's driving this sentiment shift that is leading to us overweighting those 4 themes. The rest is mostly underweight because, as we know, there's been a little bit of an ESG cold phase for the last 2 years, for example. So we're seeing underweight in those green theme. Having said that, just to be clear, we never come out of the theme on a quarterly basis because you never know when the next big event will be, right? So you could have ChatGPT type event for battery in the next month, for example, and so we don't want to be completely out. We are just underweight. So the next, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
How often does this kind of tactical momentum overlay result in themes changing from being an overweight to an underweight? Will this slide look pretty similar this time next year, or is there quite a lot of movement within
it changed a lot from one quarter to the next because it's momentum driven. So momentum can change quite a lot. So if I give you just a quick indication, semiconductors had been overweight all of 2024 and turned underweight this January. AI was in fact underweight last quarter and now went back to overweight. Cloud and cyber were neutral last quarter, so they do move around significantly.
Yeah, thank you.
Next slide very quickly shows you the current theme allocation. As I was saying, we do the top down. So the first two layers give you the weight to the theme. So at any point in time, I can say, okay, the WisdomTree Megatrend is currently allocated 13% to AI, 13% to blockchain, 4% to sustainable food. That's one of the advantages of doing it top down. Then we still have to pick the stocks, right? And the next slide explains our thematic philosophy on the stock selection. So just to be clear, this ETF is not an ETF of ETF. It is buying the stocks, right? But the philosophy we use to pick stocks for the 13% allocated to AI in the Megatrend ETF is the same philosophy that we use for the WisdomTree AI ETF, right? And the philosophy is very much based on those 5 pillars. It's about purity of exposure. So really have a portfolio of stocks where each stock is very purely aligned to that theme. We use as much as we can experts to help us figure out, so external experts to figure out what are those pure companies are. Differentiation is a very important point for us because we want to make sure that the portfolio that we're going to create is going to be different from the market, so that because we know this product is going to be a satellite to a core equity exposure usually. So we don't want to just say, here is a portfolio and it's basically the same thing that you already have in your MSCI World or in your NASDAQ exposure. But also we want the exposure in AI and the stocks in AI to be different than the stock in cloud, to be different than the stocks in battery, because if not, the full portfolio is not going to work, right? So purity, expertise, differentiation are really important things for us when it comes to selecting the stocks in the portfolio. And then if you go to the next slide, I'll show you a little bit more what I mean by expert. Here you can see the full range of portfolio of ETF we have at WisdomTree on the thematic space. You see that we have 11 single theme ETF, and you can see under each ETF the partner that we use. So you're going to have for WisdomTree AI, our partner is the Consumer Technology Association, which is an association of technology company basically. And so they are going to have strong link with all of the tech company and therefore know very well the different technologies, the different product and so on. And they are helping us pick the stock in WisdomTree AI. For battery solution, we have a different expert. Obviously, CTA is not going to be our expert for battery. Our expert is Wood Mackenzie, which is a global company of consultants, thousands of consultants around the world that are consulting with energy firm, mining firm, renewable energy project, infrastructure project. And so they have very strong understanding of the technology, the landscape as well. And so they help us select stocks for that theme and so on and so on. And so we use the same expert for the sleeves, for the different theme in Megatrends, right? So we leverage this expertise across the different themes that we have in Megatrend. So having discussed the full process, how does the portfolio look like? That's something we can see in the slide after this one. First of all, 650 companies. So it's by design that the number of companies is quite high, is because we don't want to be overly selective and we want to lean toward mid cap, small cap, so that it's not a NASDAQ 100, right? That means you have a little bit more stocks, but it is by design to really focus on the company that we think makes sense for a thematic exposure. The important part, though, is that even if it is 650 companies, the overlap with the MSCI All Country World is only 17%. The overlap with the Nasdaq 100 is only 14%, meaning that it's a portfolio that is mostly different from an MSCI World portfolio or a Nasdaq 100 portfolio, right? And to give you a feel of what that means, if you look at the biggest company in the world, so what we tend to call the Magnificent Seven now, Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon, and so on, what you see is that their weight in the market is going to be around the 30 to 40% mark. The weight in the WisdomTree Megatrend UCITS ETF is under 3, right? So it's less than 3% in those 7 big stocks, which shows how differentiated the portfolio is, even if in terms of number of stocks is quite high. The next slide really shows you the strengths of the process and the importance of what I was calling the differentiation between the different portfolio before. What we show here is that we have a 650 stock portfolio, right? But 586 of those stocks have only been picked by one theme, right? So if stock A is in the portfolio, it's because it was selected as an AI stock or a blockchain stock or a battery stock, but not all of it, right? 61 stocks are from 2 themes, 3 stocks are for 3 themes, and no stocks is belonging to more themes than that. So having very differentiated portfolio for each theme is really important. It allows to really have pure play stocks, but also it allows the diversification between the theme to fully play. And we don't end up with just the same stock all across the world or all across the portfolio. So for example, Nvidia is only in 2 themes. It's part of AI, it's part of semiconductors, but that's it, right? If we continue to look a little bit at the portfolio in the following slide, we'll see that it is a very mid-cap, small-cap portfolio, right? 30% of the portfolio is in mid-cap, 12 in small-cap, so almost half of the portfolio is outside of large-cap. But again, by design, we're looking for tomorrow's mega-cap, not today's. If we look at the next slide, you'll see the sector and the country exposure. The most important thing about this slide is just to show that it is a diversified portfolio, right? You have all of the countries, you have all of the sectors. It's not because it's a thematic portfolio that it is all IT or all US, right? It is very diversified. It looks quite similar to a global equity portfolio. The overweight, underweight in sectors or in country, they are very much driven by the overweight, underweight in the theme, right? So right now, our overweight is AI, blockchain, cyber, cloud. So it's obviously overweight IT. But if we have a change of sentiment and we end up into a world where the themes that are hot are battery, energy transition, and things like that, you're going to end up with a underweight IT, overweight materials, industrial, right? So diversified portfolio, but very much driven by the overweight, underweight of the theme. The next slide shows you the performance of the
Can I just chip in with a quick question on that slide? Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you just kind of combine this slide with the previous slide, it looks like the portfolio at the moment anyway has got a kind of bias towards smaller cap tech compared to the global index, being fully diversified, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Does that mean that this ETF is likely to be, or the kind of index you're talking about, is likely to be riskier than, for example, investing in the market or investing in the S&P 500?
So multiple questions. One, yes, currently it is a little bit more in small cap tech, mid cap tech than the market for sure. Is that always the case? No, right? It's going to depend on what the overweight, underweight going to be. But right now, with blockchain, cloud, and cybersecurity being overweight, you're absolutely right. It is thematic. So overall, the volatility of that portfolio is higher than a classic MSCI World ETF, for example. That's for sure. But because it is multiple theme across many parts of the thematic landscape, right? Some AI, but also some battery and also some rising of the middle class.
Yeah.
It is not as high a volatility as single theme ETF, right? So if you think about a cybersecurity ETF, the volatility of that is going to be largely above
Yeah.
the volatility of the megatrend. So in some way, you are in the middle between market and single theme, but probably closer to market than the single theme.
So it's a nice way to kind of diversify your thematic exposure.
Yes, as I was saying, the selection of theme for us, it's the growth potential, but the diversification is also key. We want to make sure that you really have those different themes across different sectors so that you can really have this diversification over time.
Got it. Thank you.
Of course. So next slide, I was saying that's the performance of the strategy since we launched it October 2023. You can see that over the last 15, 16 months, we've outperformed the MSCI All Country World. And you can see it visually that the volatility is a little bit higher than the market, right? But the growth potential is there. And so the idea is very much to extract this growth potential. What's really interesting in the next slide, and I know the next slide is there's a lot of numbers, but you can just focus on the last line, which is called total. It shows the performance attribution of our outperformance versus the MSCI All Country World. So since we launched, we've outperformed the MSCI All Country World by 3.7%, which is a number we see in the bottom right. But what's interesting is that the period during which we've been live, so the last 15 months, was not a great thematic period. A lot of themes suffered. All the green themes suffered, for example. And in fact, mostly only AI and related themes did well. And so if you only did the strategic asset allocation, or the strategic thematic allocation, you would have underperformed the market by 8%. Right, that's the 835 you see at the bottom of the first column. But the tactical allocation created 8% of outperformance. So the overweight, underweight created value. And the stock selection, the way we do it, pure, expert-driven, differentiated, created 4%. And so when you take the 3 layers, we managed to outperform in a year that was not great for thematics. So it really shows the value of the 3 layers. Just to finish, last slide. So the WisdomTree Megatrend UCITS ETF is very much a one-stop solution, right? You can get all of those themes, the quarterly tactical overlay, the stock selection theme by theme with all our experts in one product, which is the WisdomTree Megatrend UCITS ETF. Total expense ratio is 50 bips. And you can see here that it is listed in the LSE. So very easy to access.
That is a lovely segue onto my bit. Thank you very much, Pierre. So we are coming towards the end of the webinar now, and I'm just conscious of time. So I'll do a quick demo to show how to buy the WisdomTree Megatrends ETF on InvestEngine. Just in the meantime, though, please feel free to keep the questions coming. I can see we've got a few coming through at the moment. If we don't get a chance to answer them today, then we'll do our best to get back to you after the webinar. But in the meantime, I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me. There we go. That's hopefully sharing now. There we go. Okay, so yeah, nice. Here we've got a nice dummy account that I usually use. So once you're logged into the InvestEngine app on your phone or on the web browser, as we've got here, you can either open a new portfolio or select your existing one. I'm going to select this DIY one here, which has got a nice even split between equities and bonds. Their target weights are about 50% in each. Here we go. It's done pretty well. And what we need to do is we need to add securities down here. And we've been talking about thematics today. So what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down to the thematics collection, which is here under the collections tab. And we've got a nice handy WisdomTree tile here, which we can just click on. And that will take you to the WisdomTree page, which has got all of the WisdomTree ETFs on our platform here. So a really good selection of thematic ETFs here. But we've been talking about Megatrends today. So if we just type in Mega, that should bring up the Megatrends ETF. There we go. So somebody, I think, was asking whether it's accumulation or distribution in terms of the share class. The one we've got on the platform here is accumulation. So what we need to do is we add to the portfolio. You can see all the details here if you want to get a better idea of what the ETF does. If Pierre's presentation wasn't enough for you, we can click add to portfolio. And we can see, here we go, it's been added in the top right here. So what we need to do is continue. And this is where we choose what weight we want. So let's say we want to put 50% in the Megatrends ETF, and we want to get rid of this one to 0, just as an example. Here we go, we can review and continue. And then we have this nice look through feature where you can see exactly how this change in your portfolio will affect your regional breakdown. So you can see we're kind of increasing North America a little bit. We're reducing Europe ex UK, which you can kind of guess based on what Pierre's been saying today. Big increase in tech, a little reduction in industrial, and you can see the changes in the individual holding weights as well. So we're going to save and continue. And there we go. We should be done now. What we need to do now is, here we go. Yeah, we can see, here we go. The WisdomTree Megatrends has now got a 50% target weight here. So what we need to do to bring that up to target weight is we need to rebalance our portfolio, which we can do by going into options and just clicking rebalance here. I'm not going to do it because it's a demo account, so it doesn't actually work. But you can do that to rebalance it. Obviously, I've already got some fictional cash in here. If it's a new account, you have to fund your account by clicking either this invest button here, which is just a one-off lump sum investment, or you can click set up a savings plan here, which is where you can kind of do a regular investment if you want to do that as well. Right, that is all I wanted to say on that bit. Now, I did see in chat we had a question here about the tax year end and where you can get reports. So I'll do a quick, brief trip to our report section. This is where you get your reports up here. Click create report, and then you can see here you've got a capital gains tax report and your consolidated tax certificate report here. Both of those should help you fill out your tax return for tax year end in case anybody else is wondering. And that is as easy as that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And we've got about 7 minutes to go through some questions. So let me have a look and see what we've got in the chat. Okay. Okay, so you mentioned DeepSeek earlier. I think right at the start of your presentation. One quick question: how has the launch of DeepSeek kind of changed your outlook for thematic? Has that changed the content of the portfolio at all?
So the short answer is no. What's interesting about DeepSeek is that I think it validates the way we build the portfolio, and in particular, the fact that we never go to zero on a theme we believe in, because you never know when something unexpected is going to happen. And also it validates the way we build the different sleeves by having quite a lot of stocks, because we don't want to buy too early in a narrative, right? And so the narrative in AI, for example, right now, or like 3 weeks ago, was it's super expensive to do a large language model. Only the big players will be able to play, and everyone else will have to buy it. And so the big winners are going to be NVIDIA, Microsoft, Alphabet, Google, and so on, right? What DeepSeek did is just show that that may not be true. Maybe, in fact, everyone can have their own large language model because it's not that expensive. And maybe not all of the value created by the theme is going to accrue to those big names, but maybe some smaller name will do well. And that's why we've seen small cap software do very well in the last 3 weeks when larger names have not done well. But because we have this approach of being quite diversified, not buying into the narrative early, have quite a lot of stocks, keep our option open, this is just validated our view on how to invest in thematics, basically. When it comes to the tactical overlay, as you can see, it's quantitative only, so qualitative views like DeepSeek would not enter into account. But the fact that we overweight cyber, cloud, blockchain, which are all small and mid-cap tech, has been very beneficial for sure. And the fact that we are underweight semiconductors, also pretty good, knowing that a lot of the result of DeepSeek was some hits on the big semis.
Yeah, that makes sense. On that same kind of theme here, about kind of US mega cap tech, valuations are obviously really high in the US at the moment, but this fund seems to have much more exposure to kind of up and comers that you're talking about, as opposed to the kind of big existing tech companies.
Yeah.
So does that also mean that this ETF is kind of cheaper from a valuation standpoint than, say, investing in the S&P?
So no, it's probably okay. So because the S&P is US, it's a bit of difficult to compare. What's clear is that it is cheaper. It is a little bit more expensive than the MSCI World, right? But it is cheaper than the S&P 500, right? Why? Is because you don't have those big stocks with very big weights. Like I said, 3% to the max 7 at most. And you're right, a lot of those smaller stocks right now, they're not that expensive. And so having a large overweight to those from a valuation helps. Now we're talking about thematics, growth stocks, deep growth stocks. So they tend to be more expensive, right? So it's not a big surprise that we're slightly more expensive than the MSCI World, but that valuation spread is quite tight. And again, very much cheaper than the S&P 500 right now. So yeah, that's clear.
And how do you kind of see this ETF, the Megatrends ETF, being used by clients? Is it more of a core holding, or is it kind of more of a satellite? Is it a full replacement for thematics? Is it alongside thematics? How do you see it being used?
So I think the main use is as a satellite to the core, right? Like we've done quite a lot of research around the use of thematics, and if you look at historical numbers, it feels like 15 to 20% of your equity allocation being in thematics seems to be quite beneficial. So that's kind of how we think about this. 80% in MSCI World, 20% in Megatrend, kind of, it would be a logical choice. Now, for some investors, they really like the idea of choosing the theme themselves, be a little bit more active. In that case, I would argue that Megatrend can be used as kind of the core of this thematic asset allocation, right? And then you can have a little bit of a theme around, but having Megatrend inside allows you to have this diversified allocation to theme. And if something quite unexpected happens, you still have the allocation to the different theme through Megatrends, right? So that also can be used like this.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good set of use cases there. We've probably got enough time for one more question. So it's the final question I'm going to pick here is about the number of stocks in the portfolio. I think it was about 650, right?
That's right.
And that's a pretty big portfolio. That's a high number of stocks. So why did you settle on this number and not a smaller or larger number of stocks in there?
Yeah. So we didn't go and say we want 650, right? Just to be clear, just the result of the number of themes we have, and for each theme, how many stocks we think are pure play stocks, right? Now, the key for us was that we don't want to have a huge overlap with the NASDAQ 100. So we have to go out to smaller stocks. If you go out to smaller stocks, they're earlier stage, they're a little bit more risky, therefore you need more of them to diversify the risk, right? So that's one of the things. The second thing, as I said before, we don't want to pick winners too early. A good example we always use is like, let's say you want to invest in the internet in 1998, right? You see the internet coming, you want to invest. If you say, I'm going to pick 2 or 3 names only because that's it, I want to be concentrated, you may very well pick Yahoo and AltaVista and Netscape as your 3 names. And you would have seen the theme, but the investment result would have been terrible, right? Yeah. Because at the time, Amazon is basically a bookshop online, and the addressable market is tiny, right? Like books is fine, but is it really a big market? So you can't guess that Amazon is going to become AWS, right? Basically. So our approach has always been, if you invest in the internet in 1998, pick the top 20, 30, 40 names. Some of them will die, but the important thing is to get the Amazon in, right? And so that's the approach we are taking. We are taking a relatively wide net to make sure we don't end up with the right thesis or the right theme, but the wrong investment thesis for that theme, right? And that's why we cast a relatively wide net for both the single theme and the Megatrend, and that ends up meaning that we have a 650 stock portfolio at the end. But again, the really key for us is that in 20 years, right, the 10 biggest company in the world will probably not be Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon. Like if you look at history, maybe one or two make it over multiple decades and stay at that level, but usually they don't.
Yeah.
And we want to have those new 7, 8 names in the portfolio today, right? And it doesn't matter too much if we have also other names that don't make it, because the multiplier that those companies can have by being early and reaching the top 1, top 2 company in the world is more than compensated for the potential loss, because it's completely asymmetric, right? If you invest in the right company, you can do 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, right? If you invest in the wrong company, you can do -1 time. That's it. You can't do -2, -3, right? So that's the logic.
Yeah, that's a very thorough answer. Thank you. Okay. I am going to have to call time because we've now slightly overrun. If we haven't answered your question today, then we'll try and get back to you over the next few days. You can always email support@investengine.com with your questions, and we'll get back to you that way. Now, if you do want to find out more about the Megatrends ETF or any of the WisdomTree ETFs, just click on that WisdomTree tile at the top of the thematics collection page, and you can find all the details there. So I think all that's left for me to do is to say thank you to you, Pierre, for your time today. I think that was a really good discussion. Hopefully everybody found it helpful. Thank you to everybody else who's dialed in for joining, and I'll see you on our next webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.